which are really important for us. We found ourselves in design. Our pilots came for a basic income, and we have organized these sessions to include any remarks by the people interested on this project. This is why the sessions starting today have the participation of experts and pundits from the academia and professional sector in the design and assessment of public policies, and also in social experimentation. We would like to thank you all for your collaboration. In order to promote debate and to be transparent, the office has published the pre-proposal design document that is published in Renda Básica .cat. During the summer, we will release a second version with the pilot scheme and the assessment strategy to be followed. We will start the sessions, the working sessions. Nuria Cuencaleal, the General Secretary of the Presidency of the Government of Catalonia. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's my job to start this session. I've been entrusted with this task. These sessions on the pilot scheme for a universal basic income. As you know, the Catalan government has included this in its government plan on 4 basic pillars. Is an example of transformational projects of one of these 4 transformational pillars, not only because it is transforming lives, it's going to transform lives and livelihoods, and will also transform the society as a whole, providing it with greater equality and welfare, and it will increase the welfare of society. And I also believe that it will transform the way we design public policies in the social arena. This is why this is a transformational project in many aspects. Since we started our mandate with this clear objective to promote this pilot test for a universal basic income, we have created the technical office led by Sergi Raventós, which you might know, and we would like to thank him for his efforts and his job. And we have also created a steering committee that will guide us in the drafting of this project and the steps we are taking to design this transformational public policy. There's also an important building block to this project, which is represented by Evalua, that provides us guarantees that this project will come forward and that will provide results and have a social return from these public policies. It is important that public policies and also social policies incorporate assessment elements since the get-go, since the design stage. So this assessment will provide us a value of our job. We are also aware that aside from providing a good design and assessing the social return, the project needs to be communicated and explained correctly, because this is also, apart from being a transformational project, is also a radical project. So it needs to be correctly communicated and we need to discuss it. And this is what we want to do during these working sessions, sharing knowledge, ideas, and suggestions to be incorporated in the drafting and design of the project. This is why we will get experts on board that will be working and have already been working in public policy projects that will provide us advice on the design of the scheme. So I would like to thank them as well for taking part in these sessions and their commitment with the work we're doing. So let me thank you for taking part, for your commitment, and taking part in these sessions, and welcome you all and opening these working sessions. I hope you enjoy what we're going to talk about today. Thank you. We will begin the working sessions with the participation of Sergi Raventós and Panyella. He's the director of the pilot scheme office for the implementation of the universal basic income in Catalonia, and Marc Balaguer Puig is the director of Ipadua. Thank you all for being here. We welcome you to these working sessions for designing universal basic income in Catalonia. These working sessions have been organized by the office. And I would like to thank them for their efforts. This is intended to be a space for debate and dialogue to submit the pilot scheme for the consideration of experts, people from around the world with experience in the field of social science and a long career in research. With these working sessions, we want to find complicities and synergies by different areas of the civil society in Catalonia and the collaboration of the various departments of the Catalan government, economy, social rights, feminisms, employment, culture, etc., with which we are working together from the presidential department, to which I would like to thank all the support given to promote this pilot scheme since the beginning of the office. We feel inspired by the transparency in the management we carry out. This is why we'd like to have a public discussion on the pre-proposal of the pilot scheme we are presenting today. We are not alone in this daunting task, I would say. We have an advice committee with support by social movement and entities that support and know this proposal in depth. We will soon have an ethical committee and a scientific committee to ensure that we do our job correctly and that it is recognized by people outside the pilot scheme. Also, the Evalua Institute, who is helping us in the design of the pilot scheme, and I will also thank the IDESCA for collaboration. Universal basic income is nothing new, but this is still to be communicated to many people. It has advanced a lot in the recent years, and as you know, let me remind you that universal basic income is an economic benefit to an individual, not to a household, just to a person, for all citizens and accredited residents. And it is also unconditional, regardless of any other requirements. The amount of this benefit, we call them basic, it must be basic to cover the basic material needs of the citizens in order to guarantee a real freedom when deciding on their own lives. We need to advance on the fundamental idea from a Republican standpoint that this basic to exist any other rights depends on this right. This Republican right should be the guide of this scheme. European states, we are used to support education and healthcare are basic rights, and therefore no one needs to be left behind or excluded. This is not the case with material existence. Basic income is a change in paradigm in social policies. It allows us to open grants to new possibilities and fight the resignation that everything has been already decided from the neoliberal groups have submitted other options for a basic income, but they defend that this basic income, these citizens would be able to choose in the private sector their healthcare and education services. This is not the model we defend here. Our proposal is a part of a new concept of welfare state in the 21st century, a proposal that wants to strengthen this welfare state and from a Republican point of view, making people, citizens, the center of it, providing them with real freedom. In the last 2 decades, in a response to the failure of most traditional economic benefits, and due to the increase on evidence-based policies promoted by many scientific and political entities, we have observed an increase in the interest of the increase of economic benefits that could be assimilated to a universal basic income. The limitations and difficulties related to the conditionality of many benefits, such as low coverage rates, stigmatization, low intensity of the benefits, poverty, etc., have contributed to make basic income more popular. By making this limitation explicit, many municipal, regional, and national governments are reaching the conclusion that these traditional policies are not well equipped to eradicate poverty and social exclusion. That's why they are exploring innovative policies to face these problems. We need to add the economic consequences of the pandemic, which has exacerbated the interest of many governments, research centers, and NGOs on these sort of pilot projects. This is the case of Finland, the Netherlands, Canada, Namibia, Kenya, the United States, India, Brazil, Iran, and many more countries. Since the 60s, there have been more than 200 pilot tests around the world. We will hear about them, some of them, during these sessions. The pilot scheme can be a good opportunity, not only in social terms, but also regarding the international image of Catalonia, which now is being regarded by many other countries. The Catalan pilot scheme. Most of the experiments carried out to date has shown that individuality associated to basic income generate positive results. For example, reducing poverty and indebtedness, improving food and nutrition and education results, and increasing the trust in people and institutions, promoting entrepreneurship. Manitoba, Namibia, and India have based these pilots on controlled random approach. This methodology has been very positive because it allows to observe the results based on unconditionality and individuality, because the people taking part in these pilot schemes were distributed and separated randomly around the territory. Due to this characteristic, these pilots haven't been able to report on the effects of the third feature associated to basic income, which is universality. what would happen if everyone could have access to this benefit, not only a few citizens. This pilot scheme is submitted not as a randomly controlled project, but rather as a saturation survey. So a treatment that will be applied to the whole citizenship. With this methodology, we will be able to observe the impact on an individual level, but also on an institutional level and the community dynamics and socio-economical dynamics involved. Another feature of this pilot scheme is the amount of the benefits and the coverage, which these differentiate them from other previous pilots. We will have 5,000 participants, and the amount will be calculated on the basic poverty threshold. In other pilots, the amount of participants were lower or the benefits were lower. So that's why our pilot is one of the most ambitious in the world. The main objective is to observe the effects it might have with economic benefit of a universal nature, and to see the macro effects that the society experiments. Due to the fact that the impacts of this universal benefit start at a particular level, the project will seek to understand the impacts related to the domestic individual level. In our pre-proposal document, you will see several options we've been working on and that we will be discussing. We are at the design stage, so we are subject to changes and modifications, and this is the reason for these sessions. This is why we have experts in the design and assessment of public policies. We know this has a cost, but we want this scheme to be robust with satisfactory results. We have proposed two amounts of benefits guaranteeing the poverty threshold. We are talking about amounts that for an adult could go around 700 euros, for someone living alone around 900 euros, and for minors 300 euros. We propose two options for the benefit. The duration will be 2 years. We have also proposed two universality options, one for 100% of the residents, and the other one that 10 or 20% of residents with a higher income will not be receiving this basic income, in order to simulate the redistributive effects and taxation effects of possible implementation of this scheme. The relationship also from the basic income with other social policies and the personal income tax is another important feature of this scheme. This scheme will work in a pre-existing basic income scheme, but it's also submitted to the regulations, the current regulations regulating economic benefits. So its compatibility will depend on the taxation and subsidiary nature of the benefits, and whether or not this basic income is taxed on the income tax, and this would have implications on the existing benefits someone is receiving. It might be incompatible with other benefits because the amount would exceed the economic threshold established for this sort of benefits. This incompatibility will provide a good observation of the changes of the basic income in the demand of other subsidies. Regarding the personal income tax, the ideal scenario is that this basic income is exempt. It depends on the IRS treatment. If if there is taxation, we can foresee deductions on the autonomic part. The sample is around 5,000 people, as we mentioned before. We've been working up to date with 2 municipalities. This is temporary. We know there will be changes in this respect. We know that this is subject to analysis, and we are open to possible changes in the forthcoming weeks. And these working sessions are just for that, to do this assessment, to discuss this. We will work with municipalities because the effects could be diluted in an urban, bigger environment. That is why we also have the criteria that the beneficiaries need to be residents in those selected municipalities. It needs to be effective residency. That's why we need mechanisms to accredit that. The beneficiaries need to commit to participate in the reporting mechanisms and follow-up mechanisms, and to accept access to their personal data in order to carry out the implementation and assessment tasks of the pilot scheme. Beneficiaries will also commit to communicate any changes on the household composition, any birth, mobility, etc., that are relevant for the development of the pilot scheme. Assessment of the scheme includes 2 working areas. Assessment of the implementation, to assess the deployment. We need to assess how it has worked, the main barriers, to identify any improval measures. Impact assessment through surveys to see the impacts. Qualitative and ethnographic follow-up, and administrative registries. And to wrap up, I think we need to be very proud and excited to have this pilot scheme in Catalonia that is able to show and to assess the impacts of a basic income, a universal basic income, with all that's implied to guarantee the material existence of the population and to increase their level of freedom to decide their future. We can say that universal basic income, understood as a national project, as up to now, and no other public administration of Spain has approved any pilot scheme of these characteristics. This separates us from the rest of the state and highlights the image of Catalonia as spearheading public policies. Thank you for your attention. Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the Presidential Department for inviting us to these working sessions, also to the Office for the Basic Income implementation, for counting on us for the assessment of this relevant project and this strategic project here in Catalonia, such as the implementation of this pilot scheme for a universal basic income. The General Secretary has mentioned before, and also Sergi has highlighted the importance from the point of view of the assessment, having from the very beginning to have an assessment from the design stage. This is the way assessment can go one step further and provide greater better decision making. And this is what we want, to differentiate the assessment of public policies and academic research, is that assessment highlights or want to support decision making by the public authorities. This is why it is important that we discuss and work together on from the design of this policy. I won't be speaking as much on the assessment of the pilot scheme. We will talk about this tomorrow with Mireia Borrell, who is in charge of this. Let me just highlight some features that provide us a nuance of the importance of assessing, how important assessing is from the point of view of improvement of public policies. Basically, we are a public consortium. We are composed by the Generalitat, Pompeu Fabra University, and the provincial government, and we generate evidence and carry out assessment, and also to group these assessments around decision making. We are a small entity. We work together. We're third sector entities, and we have a multidisciplinary team with assessment experts. We generate evidence and we group this evidence. This is what we try to do. When we carry out an assessment, we try to see how this assessment can generate recommendations that can help in decision making. And we follow this plan more or less. On the left, you can see how we can help the administration to make the relevant questions on public policies, questions around how policy can give a response to a specific need, or how it can be designed, and what kind of design allow policies and activities to give a response to the objectives, and how to help to start these policies through the assessments of the implementation, where you have some objectives, but when deploying them, you sometimes don't reach the citizens that were intended. And we try to see the factors and conditions that create this, and we try to generate knowledge to help improve these policies. Then we have the impact assessments that seeks to see the impacts of public policy, bearing in mind only the aspects related directly to the policies and no other aspects. This is what we do regarding evidence generation, and later we will see some examples on how we match this evidence with decision making. There's no use in generating evidence if they are not transformed into recommendations. So briefly, let me give you a few examples of assessments that are related to both the universal basic income and the type of assessment we will be carrying out. So briefly, we did assessment of the requirements of energy poverty in Catalonia. 4 or 5 years we were talking about energy poverty, but we didn't have figures, we didn't have a quantitative assessment. And in order to have the dimension of this problem, which was the most important aspect before providing a solution, we needed to measure. We needed measure and metrics. We created 3 definitions. Based on these 3 definitions, we try to apply them to our own reality. And this is how we estimated how many people were affected and what energy poverty was. And this was used to have a dimension of the budget involved. This is regarding necessity assessment. Regarding the design, we worked with many design assessments. I will give you an example of the debt mediation service of the provincial government. Based on this procedure, this service provided their activities, and based on this, we analyzed the literature to see other similar services, what were the results achieved, and this helps the design of what we're trying to do this here, in Catalonia. Regarding implementation assessment, which is also one of the elements that in our pilot scheme will have a high level of relevance. Recent assessment is the citizenship income guarantee. We've been trying to assess the target population, trying to define the areas where this population is overlapped, to know the geographical distribution of the beneficiaries, and to assess to what extent the fact of receiving a guaranteed benefit, people move farther away from severe poverty. This is not an impact assessment, because it is not, but allows us to see to what extent guaranteed income allows citizens to move away from severe poverty. Regarding impact assessment, we worked on a pilot by the City Council of Barcelona. This was done based on several modalities. Along the Besòs River, we analyzed the impact based on a controlled random test, and due to this, we saw this basic income generated an impact in the increase of welfare, and generated also other impacts such as health and employment. These are examples of some of the interventions we have been assessing, and let me briefly explain what we do so that these assessments don't get forgotten in a drawer. We generate policy briefs that is a synthesis of assessments with statistic calculations that are summarized on a 3 or 4 page document. And apart from this, we are working on the creation of toolkits that will help people working on the public administration to better understand assessment, how to create indicators for such assessments. We have currently 11 tools that allow us to approximate people from the administration to assessment. By the end of last year, we started a playbook on how to incorporate gender perspective on the assessment of public policies.
Altres iniciatives que estem també posant en marxa per apropar l'avaluació.
Initiatives that we are also implementing are some good initiatives, and their goal is to produce documents that are also brief, that can help us respond and find the answer to some questions that have been already answered in other countries and in other contexts, to try and adapt them to our reality. So, for example, in the field of education, we have created 18 documents, each of them focusing on specific things, for example, things that work fine in summer programs or individual tutoring programs. So we assess programs developed in other countries, and this is summarized in a very brief document that allows us to see whether this works or not, under what conditions, and for what type of students, etc. And we have also started in the field of child poverty with Tax Department and UNICEF. So we will also publish this document, and also in the field of youth. So we try to see what's done in other contexts, and we try to adapt these experiences so that they are useful and helpful in our context. Now, let me talk about the importance of assessment in general. So we try to define the assessment as the knowledge generation around a policy, as the result of asking questions on the design, on the impact, etc. As I said before, the goal of this assessment is to generate instrumental knowledge. And what's important here is that this is a systematic knowledge. And this is what's significant to me, and this is what makes it difficult to include it in the public policy circle, and I will reflect more on that. Asking about a policy generating this knowledge on a specific policy is what allows us to know whether a policy is working or not. 3 years ago, we invited Howard White. He's someone who has worked in different fields in the UK around the What Works initiative. So they gather evidence. And what he said is precisely this. Often in impact assessment experiences, we see that most of the policies do not reach the expected results. And this is the case in educational policies, in employment policies. And he also compared that to, for example, when Microsoft or Google introduce a new feature in their searching engines, we have signed a consent with which we say that we are allowing them to assess things thanks to this signed consent. And so he was giving us this example of entities that are constantly assessing what they do. And they realized that most of the improvement generation did not have the expected results. So in a way, here the idea is that if the interventions that are performed from the public sector, even business policies, aren't working, why should we assume that this will work in our context? And this speaks about the need of systematically assessing everything that we do. And if not, we will be doing day after day the same mistakes. We know that 80% of employment measures do not work, but we need to assess them to find out which aren't working. And here it's the same thing. We need also to assess the income policies. So assessment is a responsibility exercise in terms of the public resources and also in our own organization. And this is also a transparency exercise. And on the other hand, the fact that policies try to respond to new needs, changing needs, the fact of assessing constantly makes that this innovation becomes a social tool. If we are questioning what we do every day, probably we will be able to improve our policies. So this is the only way that we have in the public sector to, or maybe it's not the only way, but this is one of the easiest and accessible ways that we have to generate innovation and public value. So if we know that assessing is something that improves our policies, why don't we assess more? Well, because we really don't know what this assessment is about, and there is also a problem of incentives. assessing has high costs, and sometimes this is not integrated in the administration's dynamics, so there isn't any task that is part of the job descriptions of people working in the administration being the assessment. So this is something that is added upon to management and other tasks. And also administrations face problems when implementing this assessment. Sometimes it's more difficult than others, and so it's not easy. We don't have administrative registries. We could use these administrative registers. This is a tool that could be used in a very cheap way. Also ensuring people's and data's safety. And also, we don't assess more because there is a gap between what does the administration and what is done from the academia. So it would be important to try and create more bridges between these two worlds, and this would generate probably better results, and this would promote assessment. So unfortunately, as I said, assessment is not integrated in the cycle of public policies. Generally, oftentimes the administration implements policies, but then those aren't assessed. This is why it is important to break this paradigm and to integrate systematically the assessment in the cycle of public policies. And what's also significant with a pilot scheme is that this is done by definition. And our pilot scheme on universal basic income puts the assessment at the core. So the assessment becomes the raison d'etre of this pilot plan for us to be able to test it and to try and find out which are the effects of this policy. So, which are the important aspects in general in a pilot scheme? Well, pilot schemes allow us to control, to monitor the answers that will be given later. So this pilot scheme has been designed based on the doubts that we have, and we can do that from the beginning. And this is a challenge because the fact of being able to ask many questions, and that's what we have realized when we have assessed other pilot schemes. So one has the will of asking a lot of questions, but then if there are too many questions, then the pilot scheme is slower when answering them. Then also the internal validity aspect to it is important because the pilot schemes have the potential of comparing theoretical evidence, so it is important to see whether that's the case or not. And also the results mainstreaming, and this has to have also an external validity. So these are questions that we need to bear in mind from the start. We have mentioned before all the pilot schemes that have been conducted in this field of basic income, and recently we have seen that governments are also doing more and more pilot scheme. In the US in 2018, they approved a law so that the public agencies, the US departments, assess pilot schemes. So there is a department that advises for the realization of these pilot schemes. And so in the UK, another example, they have the Innovation Grow Lab. They also have an office here, and they also assess pilot schemes in several departments in the UK. and also in other administrations. And the European Commission, in the Horizon Programme framework, is starting to fund the implementation of pilot schemes in the framework of the SME support field, the field of SME support. So we have increasingly more pilot schemes, and they are very important. They have a huge potential when it comes to improving public policies. And some are related to mental health, income, and health. So to us, having the possibility of taking part in this basic income pilot scheme is very important, and we hope that we will have a good contribution, and we hope that we will be able to derive as many lessons as possible. Thank you.